Welcome to Lead Today with me, Kalina. Let's talk leadership. Hello and welcome back to the show. As we just finished this series on Memorable, my book, Lessons to Leave a Legacy, I started getting some questions asked, and I thought, okay, rather than doing a bunch of different interviews or episodes or answering the question repeatedly person by person, I thought it would make a lot of sense to do a bit of an episode answering some core questions like, okay, why did I choose to write a book? And what was it like writing this book? And, that'll just be my experience. So I'm certainly not here to tell you everybody's way of writing and publishing a book, but sharing mine. And mostly I'm doing this so that I don't have to repeat myself, and I can I can share this and have it be something that's known, just at least in terms of my experience, because I think for me also, before I had written the book, I really would have loved to listen to something like this and get a sense of, okay, well, what did it take? Why should you write a book, or should you at all? What's one experience like? So why did I write a book? Why did I choose to do this? I think it initially, it sounds like a very attractive endeavor. And in all honesty, it was out of ego, I would say. In the beginning, I thought that I should, because I had this coaching business and I was coaching people, and people in the coaching world write books. And that's sort of the thought that I had in my mind. And so then I just sort of inferred that, okay, this means I should write one and it'll be good for my brand and good for me, which isn't entirely untrue. But what happened was I set out to write this book, and I did a pre-sale campaign on Publishizer, which that's an interesting move in and of itself. So maybe we start there as the story goes on. So I wanted to write a book. I didn't really know how to go about that since I had never done it before. And so I actually heard about Publishizer from a friend who had also put their book on the platform. And so I thought, okay, this could be interesting. You essentially write up an outline. If you have a finished manuscript, you can use that. I didn't. So I wrote up an outline about the book and some details, who my audience was, how I plan to promote the book. And you put that up on their site, and then you share that with people, and the website obviously shares it with their audience as well. And so people can buy your book and support your campaign for this book. And so we sold over 500 copies, and that was interesting to some publishers. And so there were over 40 publishers that were replying. A couple of maybe things to be aware of on a platform like that is, one, they're going to take 30% of your sales. So while you do get access to some publishers and a site for your campaign, and a way to collect funds and put your book out to the world, you are giving 30% of what you sell in that pre-sale campaign only. So not future book sales or anything, but just that campaign, you're giving 30% to Publishizer. And I think that's standard for different crowdfunding campaigns, maybe not the percentage, but the idea that they get a piece of that, right? So they can make money. But that is something to be aware of, because you could run a pre-sale maybe somewhere else for less money. I think the benefit there is that you're connected with these publishers, right? So the idea was, okay, I'd like to be published. I'd like to work with a traditional publisher. How do I go about doing this? I want some help. And so that was my idea of getting help and support. I don't know that I would do that again in that way. But of course, hindsight's 2020. And also, once you've published one book, I think, and depending on the sales of that book, you can make a different case if you're going to write your second book. So it's a bit difficult to say, would I do that again as a first-time author? I made the choice. I think that if you want to pitch publishers directly and potentially get a literary agent, that might have been something I would have explored further that I didn't. So that's something to maybe think about, because they will shop your book around 2 different publishers for you. But of course, that comes with another type of fee, right? So you're going to pay if someone else is shopping your book around. If you want to go ahead and pitch publishers personally, all the power to you, and that's available. And that would probably be the lowest cost option. It'll just take more time, of course, but no one's taking a cut of that process, right? That part of the process, the pitching, choosing a publisher part. But it is useful to have help on that part because, well, there are a lot of publishers, and which one do you want to work with? And one thing I found on Publishizer in particular was that there were a lot of kind of these boutique agency, you pay them to publish your book sort of idea. And they'll be called maybe hybrid publishers. That's not what I wanted for my book. I think there's a whole world of self-publishing on Amazon. And so if you're kind of leaning toward the route of, no, I just want to do this myself and keep more of the proceeds of the book, for sure, I think that if you're willing to figure out the Amazon platform and self-publish, you can definitely go that route. One thing you're missing there is the Ingram distribution, and Ingram makes it really easy to be in bookstores. So if bookstores are your kind of go-to, for me, it just, I think because I grew up going to bookstores and it was a bit of a sentimental decision, probably also a distribution-based decision of, okay, I want this book to be able to, well, be seen in different places where people buy books. And so Ingram, from a distribution standpoint, is absolutely, in my opinion, the front runner, at least as I'm recording this from my research. So definitely, if you're wanting a great distributor, Ingram is pretty much the only one I found that was that widespread, and it will be in Indigo, Barnes and Noble, and really anywhere you can buy books. So now I'm getting into a bit of like, what's it like to write a book? But what was happening as I was doing this Publishizer campaign was in January of 2019, I got into a car accident where I sustained a traumatic brain injury. That really kind of put the brakes on my whole writing situation. I couldn't bear to look at screens. I had really, really intense eye light sensitivity. And so, and headaches and a bunch of other setbacks there. So, for most of 2019, I would say computers really were not on my radar. So, and if this is, I talk about this in the book. So if you haven't read the book, this might be something to kind of draw you in and hear more about my story there. And how that's relevant to you in your career or your life, how that can actually, my insights from that experience can help you. But in terms of the intention of the book, after the accident, it really shifted because I had an opportunity to consider, okay, why am I doing this? Why am I doing everything I'm doing? I mean, I really felt like I saw the potential of death really right in front of me, right after that accident of, wow, I could have been, I could have died, potentially, right? And that was really confronting. And so I thought about, okay, why am I writing this? And it's really not about me. And even though in the book, there are definitely stories about me or my insights, it's not about me in terms of the purpose. The purpose is about the reader. And I had really had that flipped in my mind because I was being driven by my ego and thinking that it would be a great kind of thing to hold up and show you and take a picture with. Like, that was really superficial. And I thought it was a good idea. And what I will say is, you know what, if that's why you're writing a book, you're doing it wrong. You are. That's not why you write a book. You write a book to help the people that read it. And so you don't need to write a book. And even if you like writing, you really have to think about, okay, what's the aim of this particular book? Because what also ended up happening in my process was that I was writing this book and then kind of feeling like I had to put my whole heart and soul into it, which I did. It was very heartfelt in how I wrote it, but I can't share my whole life with you in 300 pages. I mean, I tried to share the, really pertinent information to, again, my aim for the reader. And my aim for the reader is for them to overcome the voice in their head that says, I can't, right? That's really my main aim. It's that life is short. You don't have a lot of time. Use it wisely and get over yourself, essentially, because we talk ourselves out of so many things that we want to do. And I can just think of countless examples, both of my own and of clients, friends, where it's like, oh, I'd love to do this. And we shrink away from that thing we would love to do or create. And so I just want people to go after, or at least investigate those thoughts, right? You might not pursue every single idea that pops into your mind, but certainly if if something is gnawing at you, right, and just really on your mind, well, take it a step forward, right? And be willing to kind of go after it. So I wrote this for people that maybe want to be a bit more brave and get a hold on that voice in their head that's telling them, I can't, or this is too hard, or this is too much, or people like me don't do this, or whatever that limiting belief is. I want to just get those limiting beliefs out of the way and really spend your time wisely. And for me, spending time wisely has been aiming to be a person of character that I respect, that I can look in the mirror and say, yeah, I'm proud of myself, of who I am. I feel good and in integrity with who I am. And that's not always easy. And obviously I'm a human, so that doesn't happen all the time, but that's what I'm aiming at. And so each chapter in the book is a skill or a characteristic, or let's say a quality to embody. The word skill, it's in there, and it's kind of an interesting, you become skilled at being a certain way because you practice being that way through your actions. But to me, it's really something you embody. It's a characteristic or a quality that you embody, something like purpose, living on purpose, being authentic, being in service to others, right? Embodying patience. So there are different chapters that my hope is by reading them and by answering the questions in them, you're able to embody that quality more wholeheartedly, fully, to get over the voice that says you can't, and to go after really what you want to be doing, and to use your time as wisely as you can, given what you know at this phase in your life. So, okay, that's the book. And I really, that was a big shift from, in the beginning, I thought it was going to be a guide. I thought, again, that I needed to write this guide and kind of tell people how I had built my business, or what I, thought was the correct way. And again, I really saw it as this marketing tool, which, as I said, it sort of is, right? It definitely has a marketing purpose, but that's not why you write a book. And so I was really misguided. And I hope that this episode can maybe just give you an extra thought that I hadn't had before my car accident forced me to sit in a bed for 8 months, and really contemplate my life and what was important and what I was aiming at, because I think I was aiming at more superficial things. And I've come to realize that those things, well, they're superficial, and so they don't really endure, and they're not as meaningful because they don't go to the core of who you are. They're just satisfying in the moment, hence, superficial and fleeting. So here we are, and I've kind of had these realizations, and we sold over 500 copies on Publishizer, and then I was sort of on my way. Okay, I scrapped the initial manuscript, whatever I'd written up until January of that year, scrap it. Let's recalibrate. I redid the whole outline, looked at, okay, I wanted these qualities in the book, and let's set up each section of each chapter, and then, okay, let's go for it. What stories do I include? What questions do I ask? So each section of the book is related to sort of how I would tell a story, and then the questions that I would ask in a coaching call if someone came to me and said, I want to feel more confident, or I want to feel more this. We normally will look at, okay, how are you thinking about the word confidence and the feeling confidence, and then what are you doing about it? And normally, when you get into action, that's how you prove to yourself that, well, yeah, you're good at something, and then you feel confident, right? When you've done it. That's the only real way to feel truly confident, is when you've worked through the discomfort of not knowing about something. And I think that was a similar thing that I had to go through with the book. Was I wasn't confident as a writer. I wouldn't call myself a writer. I never felt like I was good at that in school whatsoever. I didn't get that feedback from teachers either, that I was exceptional at writing in any way necessarily. I did fine, but I really felt like I was repeating myself in coaching sessions. And so it felt necessary. So why did I write a book? And why did I go about this? At that point, after the accident, I thought, you know what? I keep repeating myself about these concepts, like coaching session after coaching session, certain mental models and strategies, certain stories, different questions come up depending on the circumstance. So how great would it be if someone could flip to chapter 16 about empathy and have my thoughts on that at their fingertips without me needing to support them, and well, indirectly through the book, but not in real time. And so that's where it's like, okay, no, I have to do this, and it has to be good. The questions have to be really well thought out. And then I had to get really serious about every single sentence. And that's hard. But that only happened once I had really gotten out lots and lots and lots of awful writing about each chapter and scrapped stories. But I just wrote out stories. I wrote out lots of different stories that I wanted at the beginning. There's sort of this real life example bit at the beginning of the chapter. And I really just got out, okay, what is empathy? Like, what's that story in my head that empathy is like? What's it like to embody empathy in my work, in my life, for my clients? How did they go about embodying this? And I will say it's really hard to let go of a book once you've finished it. And certainly now looking back, it's like I've got so many versions of this manuscript, and even the first edition that's published, right? This first version, if you're buying it after a certain date, you won't even get the text from the first version, because in between hardcover and paperback editions, I edited the text again because I had been so in a frenzy to get it published, so really wanting, I felt behind. In all honesty, after the car accident, I felt really behind. And so I thought, okay, well, these people bought my book in 2018, end of 2018, thinking they were going to get a book relatively soon. Little did I know 2019 would take me in very different directions. Then it was 2020, and it was COVID. That's not an excuse. I definitely could have used that to finish the book. But I started my company Chiefly in the US that year. And so I was in the Founders Institute Accelerator, which took all of my waking attention pretty much to fulfill on their demands. And it really stretched my ability, or what I believed my abilities were, in terms of building a company, coordinating people. And then I burnt out from that at the end of the year because I put everything I could into growing the company. And so then I burnt out end of 2020. Then I got married. Then 2021, really just continued on. I mean, I have two businesses, right? And so there was a lot, and I just didn't create the space. There's no real excuse other than I didn't create the space for it regularly and with accountability. And so that's something that if you're setting out to write a book, the moment I had an editor partnering with me on writing this book, everything changed. And so I hadn't picked a publisher yet. There were 44 interested in the book. And so I hadn't even parsed through all of those people to have conversations. There were a few front runners. One thing I would say about the platform, I wasn't initially super impressed by the publishers that were offered to me, because a lot of them were vanity publishers, as I mentioned. So, pay us $5,000 and we'll publish your book, which wasn't what I wanted. So I was really looking for a traditional publisher that would be there and believe in my book and partner with me, and so take on some of the risk, but then stand to benefit when the book sold, so that they would help me. And I really wanted that traditional deal because I wanted to be in bookstores, and I wanted that, what I had in my head as the true author experience, right? Which that's not right necessarily. That's just what I wanted. That was my value and belief around writing a book. Was I want it tangibly in a bookstore. I want to go to an event. I actually have an event today for the book, to talk about it and chat with people. And I love that. And I wanted that in bookstores, and that was important to me. So define what's important to you. Obviously, if you're writing a book or thinking about it, it doesn't have to be my way, but be clear about what you're doing, because if you pay a publisher, it's very different from if it's, an indie publisher, more so an independent, versus a bigger publishing house. And if you're a new author, they might not pay attention to you and or not dedicate the same amount of resources as somebody more established. right? When it comes to their marketing dollars and even attention from editors or the developmental process, which I'll get into. But, I went with a smaller publisher that I felt like would be there for me. And they have been. And that was important to me as well. And I, of course, would have loved to sign with Hay House or Penguin or a really big publisher, but for my first book, I wasn't there yet. So you can also be very stringent about that and say, no, I only want a big publishing house, and you'll have to overcome different hurdles in that regard to show that you're really going to sell. Because that's another thing. I think people that maybe don't come in this with a business mind and think maybe you're thinking, okay, no, I really have a purpose, and this book that I'm writing really needs to get into people's hands, which is so noble and better than where I started out. There's a business side of books that I think is really important to address because, well, it is a marketing vehicle for my work and it is a product. So it needs to sell. And so if you take all the time to have a tangible book in your hands and write it and edit it, pay an editor or work with a publisher and they help you develop your manuscript and bring it to life, that's just the beginning. And that was something that I thought, okay, once I've written it, this big load is off and now I can enjoy the fruits of my labor. And I did to some degree, but it's like, okay, no, now it's all of this marketing. And that really doesn't end because the book continues to exist. And so that's where I think people talk about it being a great marketing vehicle, because it will continue to exist in perpetuity as this book for as long as, I guess, my publisher or Amazon or the bookstores will have it. And as long as I continue to talk about it. So that's an interesting part of what's it like to write and publish a book, is when it's published, you're just getting started on the business component. And hopefully you've done some pre-planning, which I could have probably done a better job of. So that's another maybe like highlight this, once you start writing the manuscript, really it's like, okay, or maybe not when you start writing it, but you could include people that follow you along the way as you've started writing it. Hey, I'm working on a new project. I kind of did that right with my pre-sale campaign. But then before it gets published, you're going to want to get in touch with all the people for editorial reviews that could go, let's say, on the back of the book. Usually they want an early release version of the manuscript. They don't want the book to be out yet, which is something I didn't know. So if you're doing this, it could be a good idea to make a list of those people and do that, 4 months-ish ahead of your publication date so that they can have a chance. And I'm talking, Washington Post, New York Times kind of idea for blurbs or editorial reviews. So that's a consideration. You definitely want that time. And that's what was interesting for me in my experience, was I was editing the manuscript, trying to edit. But then it was so close to the impending publication date that I could have used more help, or could have been more intentional and had more of a strategy before the book came out, rather than really being all in. I was very all in on, okay, let me make sure the text is really good. I was really kind of fine-tooth comb going through everything, and it's still not perfect, of course, because that's not what it's meant to be. But I was really doing my best to say, okay, does this sentence matter? Does this section matter? And I kept trying to cull and go through it. And then I went back and forth with my editor, so I would do reviews, they would come back, and of course all this while still working and traveling and doing all the life things. So good to have a plan. And I wish that, or what I would do differently next time, is have that editorial review, marketing plan, and book tour perhaps coordinated more in advance than what I had done, and probably enlisted more support. So another thing I would say is the editor that you have, even if you're at a bigger publisher or you hire someone yourself, huge accountability partner. So I highly, highly recommend that. But make sure that your editor is somebody that they don't have to agree with you all the time, but they certainly should be a thinking partner, and maybe even your target audience in some sense. Like I feel that I was very lucky that, my editor is a woman around my age, and I think understood and resonated with my message to whatever degree. Again, I don't think anyone is going to 100% agree with how you write, because you're different people. And so that's the beauty of a book, is you write something, people can take what they like about it and reflect on what they don't and what that means for them, and have their own experience with your book. That's the whole point of a book, right? I put it out there, you have your experience with it, you learn what you can, you like or dislike what you want, and you take what you need. So yeah, I think the editor that you have is just a really important decision. And my first editor was actually in England, a lovely woman, very very good writer, to the point, concise. I loved that. I'm not much of a flowery writer. I don't do much in the way of descriptions. That's just me. I've never been a kind of fiction or like storyteller in all the vivid details and really spending pages and pages describing a scene, which can be beautiful, but again, just not my style. And I felt that she was really aligned with what it was that I was aiming at with this book, and just the way I wanted to convey things, which was kind of to the point. And she was that way. But I did notice, right, so because she's from England, sometimes my voice got lost, because her voice, she would use different words, and that's not right or wrong again, but she would say whilst. I would never say whilst. It's a great word. I like it. It actually, sometimes I feel like that accent sounds smarter. So there are parts where I thought, wow, you're making me sound much more sophisticated than maybe I am, or the way that I speak. But I really, what I did to combat, let's say, edits and rounds, and this was probably 20 at least rounds of kind of back and forth with both editors, and then a formatter, and three editors. And I think what I realized was the best way for me to make sure that the book was in my voice was to read it out loud to myself, just sitting here, and I would go through and try to read it and see if it sounded like me. So that's another thing that I think was really powerful, is, okay, is this in my voice? Well, if I read it in my head, does it sound like me? If I say it out loud, even better. Does it sound like something I would say? And because I had the intention in mind to record my own audiobook, I wanted that to be personal as well. I like talking, as you've gathered. So, I wanted it to be my voice when I spoke out the audiobook and read it. And so if I'm going to read my own book, it has to sound like me, because I'm going to read it to you. So that was really important to me. And that was a kind of another idea that I hadn't really thought through, but having an editor might change your voice if their voice comes through in the writing, and their voice could be beautiful and brilliant, which my editor's voices are. And so that was an interesting thing to say, okay, this doesn't feel or sound like me. It sounds good, but I want it to sound like me, because it's my book. And so whenever someone else would kind of put their layer, and it would change, and it would be a little bit like them and a little bit like me, and then a little bit like the next editor and a little bit like me. And so this book, it's me, but there are people that definitely impacted it, and it's them too. It's definitely them and their take on what I had written as this text evolved. And so, wow, wow, to think that, Caroline and Sarah, two of the main editors, and then Helen helped with some sweeping reviews. Like, Caroline and Sarah's hearts are in this. And that's so special too, because it wasn't all me. I didn't have to do it alone. And a lot of, I think, my life has felt like I have to do it alone. That gets me emotional just thinking about it, because don't we all sort of have those things that we feel like, oh, I should be able to do this myself. I should be able to get through 300 pages and write this myself and push. And I think a lot of my life I've been pushing, and that's great in some ways and definitely necessary to bring a project to its endpoint. but it was really nice to not have to go at this alone. And having Publishizer, having my editors, having my publisher, having readers that had agreed to support the campaign before I even had a title, really, that felt really supportive and really cool, to feel like I had this community of people behind me saying, hey, when's your book coming out? How's the book going? What's going on? So getting support, having accountability partners, in particular an editor or editors that you feel really aligned with, even if they don't agree with you all the time, they shouldn't. And having a community of people that are in your corner. And this goes for, you know, obviously any goal, not just a book. If you have any big goal and you are endeavoring to go on that type of adventure of an album or painting or a new business idea, anything really, if you can build a newsletter, and I know it sounds like a marketing thing, and it is, it's also a marketing thing to share updates and keep people in the loop, but it'll do something for you beyond selling your thing, whatever the thing is that you're creating. It'll build momentum and community for you, because knowing that I was accountable to the people that had bought my book, knowing that I had people waiting for my book, was the biggest reason that I finished it. And then number two was definitely having the editors and the external accountability, because it brought it out of my mind and into the real world. Real people need this. It wasn't just an idea floating in my head or an outline sitting in my files on my laptop. Like, it was a real thing that people needed and wanted from me and were waiting on and checking in about. And so, well, then I better get it out there, right? I better do this. And so I think that's what it's like to write and publish a book. It feels very lonely sometimes, and like it's constantly evolving, and am I ever going to finish this thing? And then if you can bring in support and community, well, then you're really in a different place of, okay, my editor's waiting for the next draft, and these people are waiting to read it, and my publisher, you know, has these ideas or this timeline that can kind of hold you to a little bit of a more structured cadence than you might on your own. So what it's like to write and publish a book, it was the most isolating yet collaborative thing I think I've ever done, and brought out so much of my heart. And it was a vehicle for me to realign and remember the priorities in my life and what's truly important, which is serving others. You know, I mean, part 1 and 2 of the book, choice and fulfillment, are really about choices about you, making the choice in your life to use your time wisely and be a person of character and go along this path of really building a life of purpose and meaning through what you do and how you show up in the world. Part 2 is about finding that deeper sense of fulfillment via a relationship to something bigger, you know. And part 3 is about the impact you have on others. And while it's only one part of the book, that's the part that's most gratifying, I think, is you've got to get yourself, your thoughts, your orientation in order, and then realize that you're not the only one at the wheel. Really, there's so many factors outside of you and that you have to trust and rely on. And fulfillment comes from being able to be in relationship with those other forces and other people, and figuring out your spot within that. And then part 3 is about how you give to others. How do you do that in a way that's impactful for both parties, all parties involved? And, you know, I'm when I see, I can't even, just seeing this, that it's real, that I can hold it, it's on my desk, it's like, yeah, I worked and waited and toiled for years for this to be the case. And I can't think of another project that took so many different skills. I mean, I want to be careful in saying that, because starting a business and having a business takes everything, takes all of the skills in this book and just any others you can think of to continuously improve and question, grow, improve, question, grow. Like, it's yeah, building a business is a big one too, but certainly writing and bringing a book to the end felt really amazing because there was a tangible end. A business sort of never ends, but a product like this encapsulates me at a point in time, and the insights that I've gathered over years of coaching individuals. And well, it feels important because hopefully, the person that bought it at my pre-sale can get this book and really, even if one question or one chapter hits home, their whole life could change. The way they approach things going forward can be different. And that's why you want to write a book. And if I was to write another one, I would make sure that I was oriented toward that from the very beginning, and oriented toward what the person reading it would gain, what I wanted them to gather and gain from it. And I might do it less than 300 pages next time. But it's such a cool journey to go on, and you really meeting people that have read the manuscript. That's an interesting part about what it's like to write and publish a book, because there were people in my life that were disappointed with what I said and didn't agree, or just thought I was wrong, or thought it wasn't beneficial, certain elements of the book. And so it's fascinating to kind of know people for a decade and then have them say, no, you know what, I can't support you or this book because of what you've said in it. That's, especially after so much time and thought has gone into what I've said. It's really interesting. People are quite forgiving, which is interesting, but at the same time, it kind of takes one thing and people will write off a whole book or a whole person. And that's another kind of part of writing a book that I think is very profound, important, is you were putting yourself on the line. It's a vulnerable experience. It's extreme. It's like, performing on stage or even speaking in this podcast. It's another way of putting myself out there, my thoughts, my feelings, my ideas, solutions that I think are useful. And that's vulnerable. And so what's it like to publish a book? It's a vulnerable, your whole heart is kind of out there on the table, and you're hoping that people will accept it for what it is. And then you have to be okay with the fact that not everybody will. And also maybe remove yourself. And I had to remove myself a little bit from this. It's my book, but it's not me. It's a part of me, right? It's my thoughts and my ideas, but it's not me. And so it's also the case that, somebody can not like my book, but still like me, or not agree with everything I've said and still respect me, or, there's so many permutations of it. So I think it's really also easy to get kind of like, okay, is everyone going to like this, or am I going to crash and burn? And I think it will be somewhere in the middle, and parts of it will feel like you crashed and burned, or it could have done better next time, and parts of it will feel really amazing. And that's just a lived experience of anything, isn't it? I mean, not everything is all amazing, and not everything is all bad. There's amazing and challenging parts in everything, and that's so critical in beginning any big project or endeavor where you're going to put yourself out there, is that there will be a range of experience, and you're signing up for all of it. You're signing up for 3 a.m. trying to get the manuscript to the editor because you want them to work on it the next day, kind of really intense nights of work potentially, unless you're way better at planning than me, and maybe you won't have late nights, but I had many. But certainly deadlines and pressure to mold this thing to the next phase and keep it evolving and growing into what it will be. So there's pressure, and then there are these highs of being, talking to a reader that just says, I was at this point in my life, and this book is just exactly what I needed for me to feel like I could go and start my business. And I spoke with a nurse that was an oncology nurse, and she said, what, I've wanted to do work outside of my job to really connect with people one-on-one about what they're going through. It's such a tough time. And, this book has just allowed me to go ahead and do that and give myself the permission. And it's like, yeah, I love when my book is changing the trajectory of people's lives to go after what they want. And so it's like that, those high moments are like, yes, this is exactly what my intent for this book was. And then, my friend saying, you've added this in the book and I just can't get on board or promote or, or endorse this. I can't write a review because of what you said. So, and then that's kind of crushing in a sense of like, what? I've known you for a decade and this is so disappointing. And how is that possible? And reckoning with the fact that I did my best and that's just doesn't mean that everyone will love it. And that's hard. And so there are people that say, I can't, I don't like this. And there are people that say this changed my life. And then all the kind of moments in between. So what was it like to write and publish a book? It was everything. It was fun and difficult, isolating, and brought me to people that I would have never met otherwise. It was a really big challenge and also somehow very easy to bring about the stories while I was letting everything pour out of me. That was such a beautiful experience. And what it's doing for me after being published in terms of being able to help more people and share it and have something that I can give to people that can really support them, even if I'm not in the room, has been gratifying. And so it's just like, it's everything. It's every emotion you could have: anger, sadness, happiness, fear. It's every emotion to get this to the point of being out in the world. So highly recommended experience if you are a writer or aren't. I think there's something so brilliant about having an idea of serving people and bringing that into the world. And a book is certainly a vehicle in which you can do that, or with which you can do that. Like you can take a book and really, really help a lot of people with the book. And I think the most important part of actually writing it was remaining it really humbled me, because I was very clear that I wasn't the best writer. And so but it brought it out of me that, okay, just because I don't think I'm a good writer, well, but I can write. So that was an interesting also shift for me personally. So if you feel like, oh, I'm not a writer, or I'm not good at this, I have nothing to say, it's like, well, you actually might have something to say. If you set out to write a poem or a short story or a book, you might actually have something to say when you give yourself the space to do it. And so I'm really thrilled that I gave myself the space to do it, despite the fact that it was terrifying and I didn't think I was good at it or would be good at it or could do it even. There were points where it's like, can I finish this thing? How am I going to finish this? So, but in those moments of doubt, I think that remembering that, well, but I can write. And so if I can write, I can do this. And I have people in my corner as I do this. Those were really useful. So writing a book is everything. Definitely think that if you're considering it, it's a worthwhile endeavor. Get the right support, plan both the writing itself, the manuscript itself, and your marketing plan ahead of time. So thanks so much for joining me. It's really been so fun to kind of go through the whole series of every chapter that's in the book. If you didn't hear that, I'd recommend, it's the episodes just before this one. So I go through every single chapter and just discuss, what was on my mind when writing it, and some stories, or why it's important, what it's about, kind of key ideas. So I highly recommend that if you're reading the book or you'd like to know more about it, you go through those episodes and get a sense of what I was thinking in each chapter. So thanks again for listening. I'll see you next time, and take good care until then.